Welcome back to another epic episode of King of Clubs. Sit back, relax, and enjoy Chapter 12, A Decade of Dance. We pulled it back after the Millennium Cup and carried on going from strength to strength. But my mind was starting to wander off into like other areas. I've been working in this industry now for probably 15 years when I started flying, and other horizons were starting to open up. I read a newspaper article back in 1999 about a psychic called Anne Walker, who was very well known and highly regarded. Our first meeting was after the Millennium fiasco. I was at a bit of a crossroads in my life. I didn't know it at the time, what I wanted to do. Could I overcome this one? When you start questioning everything you're doing, I was wondering, whether it was even worth carrying on in the rave scene. I was really looking for some answers as to, where my future lay and in what direction my life was headed. Spiritual matters and spirituality had always fascinated me. So I turned to Anne. It would be the first of many visits to see her, and I made it my yearly pilgrimage to see her once a year. And I actually became really good friends with her. Unfortunately, she is no longer with us. So rest in peace, Anne Walker. She actually told me a book would be written about me. Mental, eh? She was so precise with lots of things. I actually always looked to Anne for reassurances that things I was doing were the right ones for me and my family. She always advised me to listen to my heart and go with my gut instinct. She always said if I felt I was being pulled one way, go with it, because it's probably the right way. It is no coincidence that you decide to become a singer or an actor or take a completely different change of direction in your life. It's because you're on a journey. And that is a step along the way. It's destiny. The key to accepting your destiny is having faith in yourself. You can do it. And this is why I went straight into putting on events for 3,000 people instead of 300. I've always aimed for the stars. And I've never been prepared to settle for second best. One thing that I did do that was a bit crazy was I did a past life regression with a lady called Vicky York. Now, this is going to sound nutty, I know, but all I can say is it's the truth. So she hypnotized me, took me under. I found myself back in America. It was around the time of the Great Depression, and I was part of a mafia crime family, and she took me through these various stages of my life. I was married to a woman who was spookily like my wife, Max, who tried to get me out of my life for crime. She ended up being murdered, and I retaliated by having all her killers executed. I veered from giggling to crying to being so fucking angry. I actually thought I was going to get up and fucking kick the shit out of Vicky. Afterwards, I was unable to talk properly, and I was like clenching my fists and teeth. I was so fucking angry. I was like in a rage. I mean, I can only explain it was as real as any emotion that I'd ever felt. If it hadn't have actually happened to me, I'd probably be laughing too. But it was the most surreal experience ever. And afterwards, it actually left me mentally drained. And I was wiping away real tears when she brought me out of the I say she hypnotized me. It was sort of like a deep sleep. But since then, Vicky has done a few more sessions with me. And in one of these sessions, I was able to somehow ask God a question. And the question I asked was whether I'd been right to have my wife's killers murdered. And the answer was no, because he hadn't brought her back. Vicky asked me how I felt about my wife, and I told her, well, I'd always loved her, and when she was killed, it felt like my heart had been ripped out, and that was a real emotion. I could actually feel my love for her and the sense of loss. At the end of the night, when I was with Vicky, she had a full deck of 52 spiritual cards, which have these messages on the back of them. And she put all the cards face down on a table. And she said, pick up the one that I felt I was most drawn to and look at it. And each one of these cards carried a message. And the one I picked up said, I love you now and I will love you forever. And although you may not see it, I'm always with you. It actually made my spine tingle because it was like my wife was communicating to me, telling me everything was all right through this random card on this desk. I could actually hardly get the words out because I was so overwhelmed. At the time, I nearly broke down in tears. It was that emotional. In black and white, I know this all sounds balmy or completely fucking made up, but I've actually been hypnotized in the past. And when that happened, I knew exactly what was going on. Past life regression was different because everything was unknown. You know, I had the session recorded, so I know it happened. I can hear the anger in my voice and the despair of what was going on. My voice also changed as I became younger. All I can say is have a go at it yourself and then see what happens. See if it helps you, because it actually helped me. You know, from there, I actually developed an interest in reincarnation. Don't get me wrong. You're not going to see me in the West End dressed up in peach-coloured robes singing Hare Krishna, Hare Krishna. I won't be doing that. But I definitely feel that we do keep coming back to live on Earth until we grow to go on to the next place, wherever the that is. I'd never been a massive churchgoer, but this newfound spiritual side really started to affect me. That and the guns. I had to do one at the Ministry of Sound Christmas night in 2002, which got me thinking, you know, we were on the door, stopping all these geezers coming in with guns. And they were like saying, no way, man, you know, we need their machines, you know, there's going to be these other gangs here tonight, you know, we need to do this, we need to do that. And it's like, guys, it's fucking Christmas fucking day, you know? Whatever happened to peace and goodwill? It was actually ridiculous. You know, this was the point where I started wanting out. You know, I thought, you know, there was still the day-to-day shit I was dealing with. We were actually owned a lot of money for tapes and tickets by a group of record shops owned by this big-time music producer. And he thought no one would fuck around with him. The unpaid invoices started mounting up. So I phoned them up and they said something along the lines of like, relax, you get paid, you know who owns the business, blah, 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 blah. Unconvinced, I made a few inquiries and I heard they were all about to go under. So I called back, they said my invoices were being processed. And it was obvious they were just fucking bullshitting, you know, buying time. So soon after my call, I noticed every week one of the shops had shut down. There'd be another one shut down. The ones in London went first because most of the people they owed money to were in London and they were less likely to chase them up north. Unless, of course, they were called Terry fucking Turbo. So we took 2 vans up to Manchester and when we walked into this record shop and the shopkeeper saw 8 scary-looking buses walked in, he grabbed the phone. Unless you're ordering a pizza, I would put that fucking phone down. I'll be honest with you, I was starving after the drive and I wasn't in the best frame of mind. You've taken a fucking liberty with me, and now I'm going to take what you fucking owe me. If you call the fucking police, you get hurt. We clean the shop out, turntables, speakers, tape packs, merchandise, records, T-shirts, the money out the till. And then it's actually quite funny because there's barely any room for us to fit back in these vans. We were sort of driving with fucking turntables and fucking coats on their heads, and we were all laughing along, reenacting the Bohemian Rhapsody scene from Wayne's World, with me pretending to scratch along and remix it, like chicka, 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 chicka. Everything was above board though, because they owed us money. We left a receipt with a list of everything we took, which appeared to come to the $6,000 they owed me. All the gear was sold on and turned into cash. Then a few days later, the guy phones me and he said something along the lines like, I'd taken a fucking liberty walking off with his gear because he was going to pay me. And I was like, let me stop you right there. You're fucking lying, right? You are you think you can go around fucking people around just because of who you are? You can't. I've got the money back now. So, you know, we're done. No one fucking mobs me. And then he starts going along the, you don't know who I am and you don't know who I'm connected with and blah, 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 and who I know. And he did half know some gangsters. It turned out his plan was to go to them and tell them what I'd done. So I actually said to him, I said, ring them up, tell them how much you tried to rob from me and what I did to get it back. And then let me know if they want to fucking get involved. Because I knew for a fact that no one's going to fucking back this up, you know, especially after the way he's behaved. So I never heard of Dickie Bird, and that was the end of that one. We've actually started doing a lot of these big events at Brixton Academy. I mean, it's scary enough in the daytime, Brixton, gloomy and intimidated, and you are smack bang in the middle of all the worst no-go areas in London. with other cesspits up the road like Streatham and the Elephant and Castle just down the road. Obviously now these areas are gentrified and they're all very nice, but back then it was like being in the hood. And all these venues, especially the Brixton Academy, it actually backs on to some of the most horrible council estates imaginable. Rabbit warrens of nastiness filled with druggies and criminals. We had to generalise and assume that anyone from there was potentially one of those who was mugging my punters as they're coming out of the train station or the tube or selling drugs to them. I'm from a council estate myself, and I've always hated being labelled, but it was because I knew what went on that I could label them. Everyone from that council estate knew when One Nation had an event on, they knew there was going to be 5,000 kids from outside the area and not streetwise to Brixton coming to town. And they'd all have money in their pockets. It was a one-night opportunity to smash and grab into the early hours. 5,000 kids with anything up to 100 quid each on them. It was open season. These were the kids that we were protecting. They travelled from all over to get to our events. So the least we could do was offer them a safe night out. A lot of our punters were from nice areas and had nice backgrounds, you know. They never had to fight a gang in front of their own girlfriend or been robbed or mugged or had a knife held to their throats. From the tube stations to the venues, anything could happen. I mean, muggers would surround them as soon as they got off the fucking tube, or they'd be waiting around a corner in the shadows until the kids thought they were safe. It was a constant battle, though, not as bad as at some other places, funny enough. The main worry was these wannabes trying to bring guns in. It's no secret that Brixton is Yardie territory, you know, gang war central. And we always felt like there was this threat looming over us, kind of. We could smash him up, we could bash him up, but then we'd have to answer to the guns of Brixton. The place at the time had a really bad reputation, and it still has to this day, even though it's been gentrified. If there's a gang from Brixton, people generally brick it, just like they do with guys from places like Moss Side in Manchester. The Brixton Academy is a massive venue, and despite the best efforts of the house security, there was no way anybody could keep all the guns out. So I had to assume everybody was carrying. I couldn't let my guard down at any point. We'd have fencing up and guard dogs on patrol because there were so many doorways around the back and so many places for people to hide. There had to be this constant security presence in case anyone was watching, ready to rush the doors when we were outnumbered. This was the one venue that would always insist on their own people in the cash box. I also made sure my mum was in there with them, even though her contact with the money and tickets was limited. At least she was there making sure everything was working as it should be. She had a bit of a suspicious mind, and I was always wary when leaving any venue in case I got jumped by a gang. There was always a lot of money being taken each night, anywhere up to 40,000 in cash. To cut down the risk, I used to make sure I used to pay everybody with this money. The venue got weighed in with the notes, the door team did, the DJs did, the sound and light people, everyone. It meant that I'd shifted almost all of the cash away from myself come the end of the evening. Only problem is the fuckwits didn't know that, so you never knew if someone was planning to try to take it off you or just have a go. We'd always be parked around the back of the club for each event and always left together, always in a convoy. I'd have a couple of the heavy-duty guys with me just in case, and I'd only relax when I knew everyone was at home, safe. Even then, it was hard to chill, you know, with all that adrenaline pumping through your veins. You know, it was crazy because all I was trying to do was earn a living, you know. That's all. It was a job, you know. Me doing my job meant that other people had jobs, and I paid them well, you know. If anything happened to me, jobs were on the line. To liven the night up and to have a laugh at the troublemakers' expense, I'd always tell the lads that they get a bonus for the most cunts they knocked out in a night. It didn't mean they'd just start hitting people for the sake of it. It made them more determined to stop the aggro in 2 seconds rather than 10 seconds. Seeing a mugger absolutely shit themselves to be confronted by someone bigger, harder and scarier than them always made my night. Bagley's Film Studios was a crazy venue. And the one good thing about that venue, their doormen were all psychos. And surprise, surprise, we all got on really well with them. They were one of the few venue security teams who were always up for a ruck 24/7. Anytime there was any trouble, we'd all just join forces and break heads open. You know, it was so much better having a team of people who were bang up for it, rather than a few part-timers who were only on the door because they happened to be big lumps and they used to go to the gym. It was a great venue, Bagley's. You went up this like old cobbled street near King's Cross Station and down this hill, and there was nothing else around. So once you were there for the night. I actually think that's why there wasn't constant trouble, just a few people fucking around every now and then. We always had like a perimeter fence with doormen. We vetted everyone coming. Then there was a queue with doormen at intervals, and the cash box was round the corner with a doorman at each side. And the other corner had metal detectors with more doormen. We'd personally always have 5 blokes on the front line, the main gate, and the cobble back out the back was like a no man's land. A firm of at least 20 blokes taunted the boys one night and ended up getting chased right to the top. As soon as the doorman walked back to the gate, they were back down after him again, shouting a good fight, but not having the balls to actually bring it on. This time, though, the gang had got tooled up and they started to walk towards the doorman, looking as menacing as possible. When you've served in the army and you've killed people for your country, as a few of my lads had, a 25-year-old hoodie with a club or a broken bottle or a knife isn't that scary. No one backed down as they approached, and what the gang didn't know was Mark had just took delivery of some new American police batons that evening, and he'd already sold them to a security firm. They were really pretty. They were these extended polished steel and sounded like a double barrel shotgun when you extended them. On the count of 3, the batons came out, clack, clack. Charge! I don't think they intended to use them as soon as they did, but a few notches appeared on those batons that night. It was actually a bit like a scene from Braveheart. On one evening, we had some geezers outside trying to sell tickets one night. Now, selling tickets outside is not that unusual, but selling stolen ones is. They were actually stood at the top serving out drugs and selling knockoff tickets down this side street. We knew they were stolen because the shops would pass on the numbers of the tickets that had been stolen from the shop. So anyone coming in with them would get stopped. The kids who were bringing them in were obviously not the thieves. You know, we still let them in, and they told us where they bought them from. Dumb and Dumber up the road. So we walked around the corner and we see Dumb and Dumber stood there. So me and Gary went to have a little word with them. Where'd you get your tickets from, boys? And they started acting so fucking odd. And he brandished his rolled up edition of Yesterday's Guardian with a grin. Well, no, they were never going to tell us, were they? I mean, a fucking rolled up newspaper, you ask. That's right, a rolled up newspaper with a scaffold pole with concrete inside it. One last chance, said Gary. The guy just grinned, so Gary decided to hit him straight over the fucking nut with the newspaper. The other one, Dumb, just fucking run for it as soon as he saw Dumber hit the deck. We took his coat off him, rifled through the pockets for the tickets, and while we were there, we took his money and his car keys, and John come walking around the corner to see if everything was okay. He was actually too big to run anywhere, so I chucked him the keys and told him to find out which car belonged to Dumber. By the time John found the car and drove it around the front, the old Bill were there with us, and Alan, the manager of Bagley's. They told us Dumber's side of the story, and we discredited him, saying he was in possession of stolen tickets which we could prove, and that he had attacked us when questioned. Any injury he had was bought through self-defence. They bought it, asked for his coat back, and that was when he discovered his car keys were missing. Exactly when we saw John pull up in his car. The old Bill were torn. Now, they wanted to know why a 30-stone man was driving this kid's car. I said we wanted rid of him, so we just brought the car round to fucking make him leave quicker. When John squeezed himself out the car, Alan went over to the police to smooth it out properly. He took a photo of the kid and told him it would be kept behind the desk in the cash box and he'd never be allowed back in. Gary's guardian became very famous, almost as famous as his manners. But that's his nature, you know. He's a top geezer. And he used to always patrol the queues outside the rave to keep any trouble down and to talk to people. We always saw that Gary had a great presence. He would always stop and he would talk to people, and he could stop anything that kicked off or persuade everyone not to start simply by his size. You know, he became a bit of an icon. Everyone loved him. Everyone knew him and his trusty newspaper. One night, some kids told him they'd just been robbed in a queue and pointed out 2 guys who were working their way in and out the crowds. They sold the kids some tickets, then took them back and took the rest of their money. Not a very nice thing to do. So Gary positioned himself within hearing distance so he could suss out what was going on. The main seller was a traveller and being aggressive to everyone he spoke to. Gentlemen, what are you doing? Asked Gary. Fuck off, you black. No one's talking to you. Now, if you've seen Guy Ritchie's film Snatched, then you'll know Brad Pitt's character, the traveller with an Irish accent, that's the way this geezer spoke. Pardon me, said Gary. Now, I'm actually stood there at this point, just in case there was a few of them and Gary, needed any backup. Not that he would ever need my backup. He would have just done 4 or 5 guys on his own. No problem. The way this geezer went on was bang out of order. You know, he was being racist. And I really wanted to jump in, but I knew Gary had it all under control. Hearing someone talk to your mate like that makes you want to fucking break their head open. The Gooner was a tough geezer, though, as this bloke would soon find out. He turned to Gary. No, I won't fucking pardon you. You wanker, you this, you that. Go and fuck off like I told you earlier. Now, some people are brave and some people are just fucking stupid. This guy was fucking stupid. He actually squared right up to Gary, losing a good few inches in height, and give it all his sort of wide boy traveller talk. Then he threatened to knock him out unless he fucked off. Inside, I was like screaming, you know, I was just like, fucking do him, Gary, do him, make this cunt suffer. And Gary was just standing there, unfazed by it all. And I'm thinking, what is going on? I want to say a huge thanks to our sponsors, Fragrance du Bois. Now, for those of you that don't know about Fragrance du Bois, where have you been? It is one of the leading luxury fragrances, only available in Harrods, Selfridges, and Neiman Marcus in New York. They've got so many different fragrances for men, for women. All of the fragrances are unisex, so make sure you get involved and sample the delights of Fragrance du Bois. For all the Criminal Connection podcast crew, we've got a special discount for you. 10% off. All you need to do when you click on the link below and choose your luxury fragrance is to put in CCPOD10 for the 10% discount. The CCTV camera was what was going on. Throughout that confrontation, Gary had one eye on the camera as it swept round and was waiting until he was out of frame before making his move. He could actually see me in his peripheral vision and he knew what he was going to do. As soon as that camera was at the right point, Gary grabbed his newspaper and cracked this racist bogmouth fucker so hard round the head. He went down like a sack of shit and claret started leaking from his empty skull. I didn't want to stop it there. I was dying to jump in and bash his mate up. But Big Brother was back on the move and Gary was back on patrol like it had never happened. I think he just fell over, officer. People just stepped over him and his claret. I always like to have a bit of a laugh. And I leaned over and looked at the guy, Sparko, on the floor. And I said, I bet you won't call him a again. Everybody within earshot started laughing. The police eventually arrived, and it turned out that of all the hundreds of people in that queue, no one saw anything. We had a lot of ticket problems everywhere. You know, we used people on the fringes of our group of mates to keep eyes out for us. We put up with them selling tickets as long as they tell us if they bought any stolen ones. Books of tickets regularly went missing from shops all the time, so they'd be doing us a favour. We would always tell them which numbers to look out for. And sure enough, the time came when one of them bought some knockoff tickets and used one of the firm's radios to tell the lads on the door what the sellers looked like. It was a good setup. The amount of stolen tickets we recovered and people we smashed up as a result of our snitch was amazing. There was one funny night at Bagley's film studios. I was sat in the cash box with my mum and she was doing her thing and I was writing down all the wages books because we used to do fill them all out for the DJs and the MCs to sign. It always used to give me the It was just like so irritating. This punter's come up to the counter and started arguing and haggling over the price. And my mum said, this is how much it is, pay it or don't come in. I wasn't really paying too much attention until she raised her voice. Then the geezer spoke back and called her. I looked up from my paperwork for a split second and thought, no, he didn't just say that. I must be hearing things. Back to work. And then I heard him say it again. It was actually quite funny because my mum turned to see my empty chair and when she spun back round to look at the geezer, I'd already fucking pinned him to the wall by his throat and was punching out of him outside the office. It was a red mist moment. I didn't really want to stop. I mean, you can't go around calling people's mums in front of him. You know, you're just asking for trouble. When you get angry and you get in that frame of mind, no one can really stop you. And you know, I used to get really angry and I was like a fucking animal. You know, the doorman come over when I told him what he said. They actually laid into the fellow as well. My mum was not happy. Terry said, I was quite capable of dealing with this myself. Everything was under control. Give me my coat, I'm going home. Do you know what? I always use a laugh because when anything really bad happened, my mum would always be like, that's it, I've had enough. I'm going home. But things like that, funny as they were, helped to solidify that's in my head. You know, how much longer did I want to be doing this? When would our luck run out? You know, I started running clubs to make money out of something that I absolutely loved. And at times, particularly in the early days, it was the best job in the world. The real downside to all the great people I was meeting was that I encountered some really nasty bastards and the sort of evil people you think just exist in films. The whole rave scene was changing, you know. Once it had been stand-up people, kids out for a good time. But I think the money was always going to pull in the scum eventually, you know. It was full of idiots, chancers, con men, muggers, drug dealers, wannabe gangsters. And those were the nice ones, you know. There were a lot of negative elements, you know. There was no one other than my team was interested in getting along or doing a favour unless there was some motive behind it, you know. I'd always get offered drugs at every club I went to, mainly by punters. It got to the stage where it was all people would do, see me and say hello and offer me some pills or some coke, trying to befriend me. You know, it was really embarrassing. You know, I was always like, no, it's not my thing. Apart from anything, you know, I didn't want the hassle that would bring. You know, if I took a pill off someone just to get rid of them and then got searched that night, I'd get fucking banged up. A fella promoter or the venue owner buying me a bottle of champagne, that was absolutely fine. I mean, that's what went on and it was accepted. But accepting something from a punter would only mean they'd ask you for a favour in return. In my earlier days, there was this geezer who offered me some gear. I declined his offer and let him buy me a drink instead. I said I'd have whatever he was having, and we shared a bottle of shampoo, and we had a right laugh. Not too long after, there were police on the doors of the club checking every third or fourth person coming in. It was a routine thing that they did every blue moon. And my champagne buying friend was dragged out the queue to be searched. He actually looked at me and shouted for me, asking me what was going on. I told him not to fucking go around shouting my fucking name like that. Police were actually doing us a good turn, you know, so I didn't want some idiot like him messing it up. After searching him, they found a load of gear and it was obvious that he was some sort of fucking dealer, you know. I had no idea and I was not happy that this guy tried to befriend me under false pretenses. Police actually come over and said to me that he kept name dropping and said that I'm going to sort everything out for him. Yeah, in his tiny world maybe, but not in mine. I told him a score and that I didn't even know his fucking name. That was the downside of being Mr. Popular. Another one was all these mugs who go throwing my name about when they got into any fucking trouble. It was the I'll speak to Terry about you shit that put me in a few awkward positions. I used to get fucking calls from people saying, oh, Mr. Muppet says you're going to do this to us if we sort him out. Is it true? Of course it wasn't true. I'd tell them fucking 99% of the time I knew nothing about it and I didn't care about it. And they were quite free to give the geezer a fucking smack in the mouth without any interference from me. In fact, I'd usually tell them to get an extra one in for me while they were at it. If I could get the guy's number, I'd always phone the name dropper and tell them the plan of fucking backfired and they were going to get a fucking clump. Everyone with a reputation for fighting or violence or not taking any shit from people has been plagued with this one. I mean, I could say hello to someone in a club and they'd think they were like connected to me, that I was their new best friend. I mean, it was fucking dangerous, you know. I've never been interested in getting myself mixed up in any of this kind of rubbish, you know. The perfect example is a mate owed some geezers some money and refused to pay him. They got the and said, pay us or you're fucked. And he actually said that I would smash him up if they laid a finger on him. So by knowing me, he thought he could get out of basically paying someone money that he owed and then bring me in and all my security team as his fucking heavy mob. When the geezers phoned me to confirm my intentions, I literally said, mate, you can do whatever you fucking want to that guy. I don't even fucking know him, you know what I mean? I mean, I would never, ever get involved in beating people up as favours to people or getting involved in people's arguments. You know, if they're so desperate, they can pay someone else to fucking do it, not use me or my security team's name. I mean, I think it's offensive for anyone who's a so-called mate to do something like that to you. I mean, a real mate of mine just wouldn't have ever done that. Maybe I sound a bit like an old fogey, you know, going on about how much better it was in the old days, but those old days are not that far away. You know, the thing that gets me out of violence has progressed and fucked it all up. And, you know, it's getting worse. First, it was idiots settling scores. Then it was guys on the door. I could see that before long, promoters were going to start getting targeted. And sadly, I was right. Just as we was finishing writing this book, Peter Adewole, the guy who used to run and promote La Cosa Nostra, was basically murdered while he was out flying. That could have been me. That could have been any promoter at that time. Thanks for tuning in to this week's episode of the King of Clubs. I hope you've been enjoying the show. Please make sure you like, subscribe, it's free, and tell all your friends about us. And we will see you next week on the other side.